I've put in about a week's worth of gameplay, a little bit more into PoE 2 at this point. Having a great time. The game is super fun, and I think it is on track to being a masterpiece, even better than PoE 1. But currently, it has some major issues. I will start with the pros first, though, as there's quite a few of those. So, pros. Gameplay itself is super clean. Feels like the first modern ARPG. Any other ARPG in existence, you could tell me it was made in 2012 and I would absolutely believe you. Not that I think every other ARPG is a bad game or anything like that, but they all feel kind of samey, all in the same era. No super huge leaps of innovation or anything. But PoE 2, it feels like truly the first true next-gen ARPG. Whether it's graphics, the boss fights, whatever. The build making, it's all just, that is all just miles ahead. Boss fights are by far the best in the genre. Nothing comes even close. I've been trying to tell people that the campaign boss fights in PoE 2 are mechanically better than a lot of the PoE 1 endgame boss fights. I think the boss fights in the future of this game are going to be absolutely insanely good. So monster bounce is not as bad as I originally thought. It's still pretty bad, especially a few particular monster types, but it is improving. GGG's acknowledged this. They've known it was going to be a problem. So I expect that will improve. Now note, this is kind of a tangent, but I always feel like I have to bring it up. PoE 1 balance is actually very, very, very good. Everybody says random one-shots or whatever. That is not the case at all in PoE 1. There's some outliers, but it is not common at all. So there is a decent amount of chase items and boss uniques once you get into endgame. Talking about PoE 2 again. When you first start, at least when I first started, I pretty much only encountered uniques that are really bad. I don't know, to say the least. Like, stat-wise, they're bad, and they don't have a niche to them that you can make a build around. Kind of weird. In PoE 1, a lot of the uniques may be, like, trash value, but they can still serve a purpose, whether it's early game, bridging bad gear in maps into getting a better rare later, or they have a niche function that some build will be able to utilize. I feel like a lot of the uniques in PoE 2 are kind of just unusable. I mean, definitely not all of them, but in the end game, there is actually a good amount of chase items and boss uniques. So some very interesting ones. A lot of some of them are just PoE 1 ports essentially. But yeah, I think in the future, the boss uniques and just good uniques in general, I think will improve and be very interesting. I do enjoy the crafting in the game, but I wish you got at least like 3 to 5 tries on an item base before having to get a new one. It is a little annoying. One of the few good things I think Last Epoch actually does is the crafting. And I wouldn't mind if they stole like the stability system, essentially. So you kind of get a few tries to do what you want, and then you have to get a new one. Getting a new base every single time is not it. It's just annoying. I think with the crafting on paper, if you don't think about that, like getting a base every time, I think it's pretty good for a base crafting system. Then we'll get additional crafting updates and it'll be very solid. But honestly, I don't mind the way crafting is right now in PoE 2. I think slamming feels pretty good. You can constantly use exalts. I think it's pretty enjoyable. I know people want more deterministic stuff, but I'm sure we'll get there eventually. There's not many bricking mods on maps, and this is a pretty big plus in terms of removing annoyance from the game. There's a lot of mods on maps you can get in PoE 1 that will just completely brick your build. So there's some mods that will brick specific builds, and I think that's okay. And then there's some mods that are just unrunnable on 90% of builds. But I understand the function of this is to have a healthier economy. It creates another currency sink, prevents some inflation. But I don't know. I don't know if the annoyance is worth it. Not having to really worry about too many bricking mods on maps is really nice. So theory crafting and build making is going to be absolutely insane when the game gets more content, all classes, all skills, all weapon types. So right now we only have a fraction of that. I think it is going to be such a step up from PoE 1 with the extra mechanics such as skill combos, weapon trees, and eventually it will be an absolute monster, absolute masterpiece of a build making system. Absolutely nothing even comes close. I think it'll be miles ahead of PoE 1. I think building around multiple skills that all come together in one big combo is way cooler than how it goes in PoE 1. Where in PoE 1, usually you'll take like one mechanic and you will giga scale it. I think it's really cool to have the opportunity to not just have it be so linear. That's not the case with every build in PoE 1. And it is the case in some builds in PoE 2, but there's more opportunity in PoE 2 for experimentation and more mechanics than just scaling one stat. It's like super hard, right? Cons. On-death effects are way too prevalent. It's honestly absurd. Like 90% of packs I feel like has an on-death effect. I don't know why ARPG devs are so set on death effects. Every ARPG does it, and nobody likes it. Now, I don't think on-death effects should be completely removed. I think some are fine, like the exploding big fat guys that turn red and explode. They're nicely telegraphed, you can clearly see it. Maybe a little bit of an audio cue would be nicer if it had more of an audio cue, but on average that one's okay. But when every single pack has an on-death effect, it is just absolutely ridiculous, and it is just a huge nuisance. Res is way too hard to get early on, so this is an endgame, but it kind of ties into endgame leading up to it. So gearing up in campaign is pretty miserable in general. If you get unlucky at League Start and you won't have stuff to buy, I think right now it's actually fine. Now that there's a bit of a market, you can spend like 5 exalts and you'll probably get gear that can go to tier 10 maps. So I don't really think that's a problem outside of like day 1 and 2 of a league. Or even day 1 once the game matures. But at the start of this game, man, was it rough. Just not being able to res cap. Granted, they did remove the res penalty in maps, so that definitely goes a long way to help. But even before that, it was extremely hard to get res. I do not like the idea of leaving res completely up to RNG. I feel like there should be some decent way to target it. Like maybe make runes drop, certain types of runes drop more in different zones. Maybe in like a desert rune, it can drop whatever rune, fire res or something. Something along those lines, that would be very, very nice and go a long way. Maybe there could be a boss, you could farm a fire boss and a fire zone, farm that for fire runes, and then the other bosses for respective elements, get those runes. I think that would go a far way, because if you just get unlucky, it feels terrible. Now, getting into maps, I think mapping feels a bit flat. Definitely feel the lack of mechanics. Like, I don't know. You only have like 3 choices right now, right? And some are definitely better than others. In PoE 1, you have so many options. It's just hard to go from so many different options into just nothing. This will obviously be fixed and isn't really a game design problem like on death effects are or anything. It's just kind of a consequence of early access. So skill balance is definitely off. I think too many people are deleting endgame bosses too quickly in the game's life. I don't really think that on a game's release, somebody should be able to... I mean, it's not the release, it's early access, but... and they are stomping out the really OP builds, but some get left, and there's quite a few. So I'm hoping they fix this by launch. I do not think you should be able to essentially play for 3 days, and then you just absolutely obliterate the top pinnacle content. Not a huge fan of that. I feel like it should be a little bit more of a grind. It makes me a little bit worried for the future of the game with how much power is already available. I feel like they should have eased it in a little more. Obviously a lot of them are unintended interactions, but there is some crazy stuff in the game already. It isn't necessarily a bad thing, just how fast you can get it may be an issue. We'll see where that goes. I'm not concerned long term. But it is very hard to take power away without pissing off a large percent of players. Like, it's a common saying that games get easier over time, and it's true because every time a developer tries to take stuff away, there's just huge backlash. So, yeah, I don't really want the game to be a PoE 1 clone, where you essentially just delete endgame bosses in 2 seconds within 2 days of league start. Now, obviously this is if you play a lot, but yeah, the game is balanced around sweaty nerds, right? Obviously the gamer dads with 18 jobs, 24 tomato farms, 3 kids gnawing on their ankles at any given time doesn't really apply to them. I mean, I am obviously a streamer. I play a lot, but even in other games where I don't get the, like, I only have time to play PoE, right? But other games, it kind of just, all I do is my time scale changes. Instead of doing it in whatever time, I don't really think that I'm missing out. It's just gonna, like, well, I'm missing out, but not in the terms of, like, I don't think they should change the game around me, right? Anyways, that was a little bit of tangent. That being said, I think the game is a lot more like PoE 1 than people actually originally thought and still think. The further I get into endgame, it honestly feels more and more like PoE 1, which is kind of worrying, because I did want it to feel a bit different. I mean, it's obviously still really good, but I don't want the game to be a PoE 1 clone with better graphics, and I know that's going to make a lot of people mad who do want that, but not particularly what I would imagine the game to be. I'm not going to hate the game if it does end like that. Like, PoE 1 is still a great game, and PoE 1 that gets prettier is great too, but I like the game to be distinct, right? And I feel like endgame is pretty close to PoE 1 in terms of how you actually go about it. So I hope that changes, because right now it pretty much feels to me like you are playing PoE 1, but with WASD, and you go a bit slower. Not that much slower. Honestly, my speed is probably about the same as a hardcore league starter in PoE 1, which is not super slow. So I don't know. It's not even necessarily about the move speed. It's just, it's hard to articulate. I want the game to be distinct, basically. The further I get into endgame, I don't know. I just think so much power so quickly completely destroys beautifully designed boss fights. Now this is actually maybe more of a problem with how long it takes you to get to the end game bosses, because pretty much the way the game is right now, by the time you get to end game bosses, you're going to annihilate them if you're playing a good build. Now you can say don't play a good build, but it's not how it works. I'm going to play a good build. I'm not going to handicap myself for the sake of handicapping myself. I like games to have certain designs to them, and I don't really want to veer off from the design and do unoptimal stuff for the sake of doing unoptimal stuff, you know? So maybe the solution to that is just have the bosses show up sooner, because right now the timing and gear you have when you first fight them is way off. Maybe the base version of them is just too weak. The different... As you fight the bosses, it does scale rapidly. Like the level 1, or the first time you do Breach boss versus the third, it's way different, which is really cool. But I feel like the first one should be medium difficulty, but as it is right now, I think it's way too easy. I don't think they do enough damage. I don't think they have enough life. I fought it on my Deadeye with like 2k HP and evasion, and I was tanking slams still, and I don't think I should have been able to take like the breach move where he has the giant hand come down and it slams on you and you have like 5 seconds to get out of the way, basically. I tanked quite a few of those. I don't think I should be able to tank that, even if it is a level 0 boss fight with having essentially no defense against it. So yeah, maybe the solution is make them show up sooner. That could help. Or, I don't know. Something is off there. And then, it's also kind of messed up. I can take that boss's hand slam, but I cannot tank some random white monster that, like, throws a piece of poop at me occasionally. That doesn't really make much sense to me. So I think, like, some normal monsters need to be toned down. And some bosses, okay, pretty much all the bosses need to be tuned up. Another thing that's weird is the scaling from campaign to endgame is very odd. I can go to the end of Act 3 Cruel, right? It's like a level 55 zone. I tank some big smack from a boss. It does 80% of my HP. Okay. I map for a while. And I'm like not like at the end of Cruel when I'm actually doing it. Like I'm in endgame. I'm level 90. I go back to Cruel to test something. I go to the monkey boss. It hits me for 80% of my HP. Okay. Then I go to endgame. And I go to a level 80 zone versus the level 50 campaign zone. And I tank the big hand slam from the breach boss. And I take 80% of my HP. With the same stats on my character. Is a little weird. So I think balance. Low end needs to be tuned a little bit differently. And on the high end needs to be tuned a little bit differently as well. I think that's all the major points I have. Sorry about the few rambling times, but it's a lot to think about.